Our next speaker is Mr. Theo Hendrickx. Mr. Hendrickx works as a general coordinator, sexologist, relationship therapist, schema therapist, solution-oriented psychotherapy, suicide preventer, crisis interventionist, counselor, and teacher at the Manna Foundation. The Manna Foundation offers psychological, pastoral, and therapeutic help and advices on polyclinical basis. The Expertise Bureau offers a wide range of assistance, training, and scientific research with regard to human trafficking, specifically to Loverboy problems, domestic violence, and honor-related violence. Theo Hendrickx is also a former police official. Mr. Hendrickx, you have the floor, and please unmute yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Birmingham, for inviting to speak here. And yeah, thank you. I hope that, yes. Yeah, welcome to this webinar where I want to speak about consequences for victims of trafficking in human beings, especially focusing on sexual and criminal exploitation. But before explaining the consequences and problems of helping such victims, I would like to give you an example of the problems that arise when a victim of sexual exploitation, prostitution, or criminal exploitation leaves the forced prostitution circuit. Imagine being alone and you meet an attractive and a sweet woman. After about 6 months, you want to propose to live together. To give this proposal a romantic touch, you book a table in a cozy restaurant and buy a nice souvenir for this proposal. During the evening, you will start talking to her about your proposal, but she interrupts you and says the following: "We have a very nice relationship, and I think certainly it has a future. That's why I think that you should know everything about me and there should be no secrets between us. I have a hidden past, and I have slept with about 1,000 men as a prostitute. I've also made several burglaries and I have a criminal record." What is your answer? Will you continue the relationship? What do you think and feel for this girlfriend now? I give this example during almost every training course on sexual exploitation, specifically victims of loverboys. It's remarkable that rarely anyone wants to continue the relationship. Almost everyone has a problem with the idea that this girlfriend has been a prostitute and a criminal. This is one of the big problems. What does society think of someone who has been in paid prostitution and crime, even though it was often under great caution? How much mistrust or doubt do people have about these people and their life stories? Are these people really being helped enough to build a new future for them? Helping a prostitute is not always normally. And our practical experience shows that both in the Netherlands and international, there is still a considerable way to go and effective, sufficiently support for a new future. And in this webinar, I would like to take you on board the practical experience we have during problems with loverboy victims and their recovery and reintegration into today's society. And my hope is that after this webinar, you will have a better understanding of the problems and opportunities to make or encourage improvements. First of all, when a victim leaves the country, or when he or she is asked for a relief effort, he or she regularly encounters incompetent workers, complicated regulations, limited final possibilities, and insufficient shelter and limited preconditions to provide adequate relief effort. Also, there are more often regulated options for legal underage victims. It's often difficult to obtain them as the facilities have already been fully used. So the options available to adult victims are significantly reduced. My theme for this webinar is then Future or Downfall? Problems with victims of sexual and criminal exploitation, the Loverboys, during relief effort. I know a speech of 15 minutes offers too little space to discuss all these subjects or to provide sufficient insight, but I hope to provide insight into the complexity of relief effort and aftercare from 6 main topics. These 6 main topics are government regulations, personal problems, social and societal problems, meaning, security, and outreach offer. At first, the major problem is that guidelines adopted by the authorities regularly do not sufficiently reflect the needs and capabilities of the victims. Persecution of perpetrators is often difficult on the basis of the legal evidence necessary to convict human traffickers, including loverboys. In addition, the civil guidelines often do not offer sufficient possibilities in terms of relief effort, benefits, subsidies for special financial support, or opportunities for training and legal employment. The lack of adequate training, personal problems, or reference from the past, crime and prostitution, which are seen as determined business or organizations, create job insecurity. A major stumbling block is that the Dutch government has put the direction and approach in the hands of the local boroughs, each of which has its own policy. As a result, more and better relief effort can be provided in some boroughs than in others. Depending on political vision and views, the need to act and prioritization, victims receive their relief effort. In most cases, the range of care provided has also been determined on a regular basis with few possibilities to tailor this specially to the needs and requirements of the victim. As a result, victims often do not achieve the results that have been set as goals because their personality and circumstances do not allow them to sufficiently match the offer. A specific problem is the privacy legalization that regularly blocks or hinders relief effort. The reason for this is that relevant information can only be given to a limited extent, often only with the consent of the victim, so that the police and emergency services don't have any information and victims are unnecessarily put at risk or are unable to provide target support. Fortunately, more and more attention is being paid to the subject of sexual and criminal exploitation, as a result of which better thought is also being given to legalization, regulations, and directives. Unfortunately, changes as usual take a very long time, as a result of which victims are currently unable to receive the proper help that is necessary. The personal problems. Victims of trafficking and being have a multitude of problems, both personal and in terms of social context and living conditions. First of all, the complexity of personality problems, and trauma don't make it easy to offer effective treatment. In addition, in most cases, trauma and addiction problems play a major role in the functioning and motivation of the victim, and a relapse into old habits or the resumption of criminal and sexual exploitation can often present. It's clear that only structural, specialized relief effort can produce effective results. In addition, living conditions are also an emphatic factor. These are largely determined by the victim's financial resources. These are often insufficient due to the lack of money, many debts, often more as €50,000, and the impossibility of providing them adequately. As already mentioned, Dutch regulations can often mean little. As a result, relapse is unintentionally stimulated because the victims have to survive, and this can only be done in the way of criminal acts and prostitution. Attention in sexual exploitation is often focused on women, but also men can also become victims. There is hardly any gender-specific relief effort for men who are sexually exploited. There are a number of reasons for this. Men barely talk about their problems in this area, sometimes because of the honor-related background that leads to insecurity, but only from the criminal environment, but also from their own family or social system. In addition, there is still little knowledge available to deal with and guide this target group effectively. A great deal of research is still needed in order to offer the right relief effort. The third is the social and societal problems. As stated in the introduction, society and the social environment are not waiting for a victim of sexual exploitation and criminal acts. Quite the contrary. In addition to stigmatization, people often have doubt as someone actually wants to leave the world of prostitution and crime. There's a fear of problems with criminals or of the victim's relapse. Lack of education, limited employability due to trauma or personal problems are also frequent obstacles to reintegrate into the workplace or joining social programs. In addition, the social environment has distrust due to the events that have taken place in families or circles of friends. Due to the circumstances of the victim, isolation from the family has taken place. The family is regularly traumatized by the events and their consequences. Many people have suffered negative consequences as a result of which they have distanced themselves from the victim. This means that reunification with the family system and social environment is often difficult because bitterness, feelings of revenge, anger, but also fear of reputation, renewed reaction, and lack of forgiveness towards the victim are prominent. Someone had said to me, "Who is waiting for a whore?" And it's painful. The meaning. Meaningfulness is an important part of aid provision. Also, it's still too little taken into account. The major questions of life are, in fact, very relevant to victims of human trafficking. They have a great shortage of basic needs such as attention, security, appreciation, recognition, and love. These were often also parts of their lives that brought them into serious troubles. Issues surrounding the meaning of life, who they are as human beings, and what meanings they can have for their environment often remain unresolved. Our experience is that these conversations can be life-changing for the victims. Religious significance for victims also appears to be insufficiently addressed. Also, this can be very important for a number of victims. Then the safety or the security. A major problem is the long-term insecurity of victims. Shortly after getting out of prostitution or criminal circles, victims can normally be offered a safe place or dwelling. Long periods are usually more difficult. This constantly hampers the process of recovery and reintegration of victims. Uncertainty about safety regularly persists for years, both because of psychological experience or trauma, and also realistic because criminals are looking for their victims. That can be very dangerous for the victims. There are two important aspects to the reasons for intensive searching for and treating the victim. One is the source of income for criminal activity has been lost, and second, the prevention of the risk of criminal information becoming known. The problems are guaranteeing sufficiency safety are causing victims to hesitate to leave prostitution or the criminal world. In the Netherlands, a distinction is made between the ages of 0 till 18 years and beyond. Legalization, the range of relief effort offered and the possibility for its effective use determine the range of relief effort offered. This applies to both men and women. Youth relief effort is reasonably well organized. On the other hand, relief effort for underage victims is still insufficient equipment for victims of trafficking in human beings. Both the knowledge about effective treatment and the relief effort and the number of specialized treatment centers are insufficient due to the complexity of the subject and the possibility to support them. There are hardly any specialized centers for adult victims. The possibilities for relief effort are limited, often uncoordinated, and not adapted to the situation. In addition, the range of service offered is only determined on a regular basis, which means that it does not sufficiently meet the needs and the requirements of the victims. As a result, the therapies and relief effort are insufficient, attuned to the need of the victims. This is a major obstacle to recovery of victims. Many victims are often asked for help, such as their request for help, decisiveness and clear objectives. Victims are often unable to do this and are therefore often rejected. More training for the promotion of expertise, better legalization and regulations, and locations for specialized relief effort are necessary to obtain better results of recovery and reintegration. And finally, the last. Yes. If you look at the issues, we would get the impression that the fight against trafficking human beings and support for victims of sexual or criminal exploitation is lost. Fortunately, that's not the case, and we can slowly discover improvements in many areas. A significant number of victims have fortunately been able to build up a future, unfortunately often with lifelong negative consequences. Improvement requires close political, scientific, legal international cooperation with sufficient financial support in order to achieve even better results. As has already been pointed out, a new future for victims is certainly possible, and they need not be condemned to the negative consequences of human trafficking. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickx, for this very interesting resume and explanation about how the victims of Loverboy method are impacted and what can be necessary and helpful for us all to get them out of this circle.